It's another wonderful Wednesday, so it's another not playing politics with Alexander Keaton, and as always, my Rio Nick Bradshaw. Nick, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, buddy. How are you?
So far so good. But you know what, man? Let me say this: I am stoked. I am really encouraged because now we're looking at the ministry of truth being enacted. We're never going to have to worry about whether or not something's true or not. We'll just ask the ministry of truth, and they will tell us whatever's true today. I mean, think about it. Moving forward, we're never going to have to parse out what's right or wrong, what's true or not. It's whatever they tell us. I am really looking forward to not having to worry about this, the strange ambiguity of what's right, wrong, true, not true. Searching something out. Whatever the ministry tells us is true will be true, and I'm really looking forward to this.
I mean, thinking does take action, but an effort. But yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, what we wanted to come to on this one is, we're seeing around the world, right? Whether it's in Russia and things going on with Navalny, or whether it's in China with Xi Jinping and steps that they're taking there, the manner with which we're seeing voices being silenced is interesting. You and I were talking earlier in pre-production, and we were talking about, or at least I was considering at the time the prospect that in these other countries you find ways that people literally have been attempted to be poisoned or imprisoned, or in Navalny's case, literally both, when there are dissident voices. But what you see in the U.S. a lot of times is it's a discrediting of who you are. It's a taking away of your voice. It's a taking away of your livelihood. It's a smear. It's a cancel culture, if you will, as the kids say these days. So it's fascinating to see. Forgive the conundrum that I'm facing, but I see it like this: the ability to be so transparent about the desire to conceal.
Yeah. Well, to manipulate reality. So for those who are unaware, the reason we chose this particular title, it's a play off of, Orwell's 1984. But this all sort of kicked off I think it was like 2 months ago. The illustrious Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, because you can't call her AOC anymore. You're racist for doing that. It was what she'd call herself for 2 years. Anyway, point being, she came out and said that we needed to have truth and reconciliation councils after the election. And as of this week, CNN, was it CNN? I think it's a CNN contributor, and several others have come out basically advocating for the creation of a governmental body that would work with big tech and big media in order to, how do they, I believe they phrased it somewhere along the lines of removing, essentially removing untruths, or again, a council of truth to determine what was true, what wasn't, so that misinformation and disinformation was not spread through the media. Of course, if this sounds like Orwell's 1984, it's because it absolutely is. Like, this is exactly the kind of stuff he talked about. We've seen in I think it was Newsweek or U.S. News actually go back and alter previous articles from a few years ago so they could attack Tom Cotton for his Ranger status. We've had the Canadian Supreme Court. In fact, let me just read this one little line here. It says, not all truthful statements must be free from restriction. Simple fact of the matter is, we are seeing the creation of a culture that seeks to control reality. There is no desire for an exploration of reality or truth, or to sort of discover it, but rather they just want to be able to tell us what reality is and what the truth is, and let it be, and just let that be settled. Again, let that be settled. We'll have settled truth, just like we have settled science.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, as we've come about in this show, wanting to set out, our intention was, excuse me, was to create a you know a fact-based, historically accurate perspective on having a mutually respectful environment to discuss these topics. Where that gets tricky sometimes is that when you start changing facts, they're no longer facts. They become opinions, but when you start changing the data points, it's very hard to come to consensus. And so the bigger question I think that's always being asked is, who's determining what those facts are? Who's determining what the consensus is? And that's how you get kind of an ever floating perspective of what we are. Um, the concept of providing America as a country that was, founded by the Pilgrims going back to, 1620, and but from this concept of, well, what was 1619 about, and what that project is aimed at doing. It creates the concept that probably there's factual evidence that we can dig to paint a more accurate picture of what was actually going on. And it's going to involve things that we probably don't like in some capacity. But I hardly think it's going to be in either direction as extreme as it's being presented. And it's being presented that way because that can, if you think about it, extremity resonates, right? You draw people in. The language, we've talked about it on this show, the language our politicians are using are so incendiary all the time that there's no way to articulate clearly when there is actually something going on, because everything is constantly a constitutional crisis, a race riot, a insurrectionist movement. I mean, everything is so massive that we have to look at what these facts are and accurately identify and title what they are. But when you start undermining language itself, when you start policing language itself, you start creating an environment that, again, you're trying to tack Jell-O to the wall. And I don't know how you do that. It's not, as we talked about earlier, it's not sustainable. It will eventually self-implode.
Well, let me push, not necessarily push back, but expand that concept one more tick, because it isn't just that we have these grandiose terms being used, but rather that they're only used when it is politically convenient for it to be the thing. For example, for 9 months, we had literally month after month of violence in the streets, buildings being burned down, people being murdered in the streets, in these riots, in these Black Lives Matter riots and Antifa riots. And we were told these were mostly peaceful protests. We had I think it was it Portland or was in California? I forget which one this one was. But they actually welded and chained up a police building, and tried to set it, and were setting it on fire with the police inside. They were able, obviously, to fight off the fire, but they were trying to murder every person in that building in Kenosha. There were apartment complexes with children in them, with people still in them, that they were setting on fire. These were never called insurrections. These were at best riot. These were again, mostly peaceful protests. With, again, not condoning what happened at the Capitol. And it was violent, and everyone who committed crime should be punished accordingly. We do not support violence of any kind on this channel. But I will also say this: there were no Molotov cocktails. People were not armed. There was no burning of the Capitol. No one tried to burn the Capitol. Most of the people actually got in the lines, because there were multiple groups of people there. One was violent. One were just stirred up. The other one seemed to not know what the heck was going on, and they got into lines. So, and yet that's an insurrection. It's an insurrection that is blanketed across everyone who ever even looked at voting conservative, or not even conservative, who voted for Trump or supported Trump, or simply isn't as liberal as they want you to be. And yet, when it came to the riots, where we have the numbers are all over the place, but it's dozens of people dead, $2 billion plus of damage. You had to say, no, you support the peaceful rioters or the peaceful protesters, even though a lot of these peaceful protesters were saying they supported the riots and were protecting the rioters. This goes back to it's not just how they use language, is that the language changes depending on the context. If you're on the left, it's a peaceful protest. If you're on the right, it's the worst thing that's ever happened since the history of man.
Well, that's
and they've equated the 6th with 9/11.
Well, and that's why I think that we need to find a way that we also look at a topic here that's going to be very sensitive, and it needs to be dug in, and that's to say this: who are putting out those messages? Who's using those images? Who's using those words? I'm not here to be John Q. every person in the world who's like, the media is terrible and blah, blah. Okay, I get it. Most of us don't use, or a lot. I won't say most. I think there are many people who probably synchronize their news gathering on their own. They go through other channels. I don't think they sit down and go, oh, it's 6 o'clock. I need to watch, Dana Perino, or I need to watch Rachel Maddow, or I need to, I don't know people that do that. Certainly not people in my generation, and absolutely not those who follow. My father's generation, they'll watch shows like that. But the point that I'm getting at is that I think that when we say things like, well, they're calling it this, well, I don't know that that's the American public calling it that. It's an outlet that has been supported and fueled and sustained by a model, and that model is the mainstream media. That is changing. And that's why I think that what you're going to start to see is that the tighter people grasp for control, the more they actually lose, right? I mean, I had a dear friend once say, the only way to hold on to something truly is with open hands and with open arms. And I'm in a place that I think that we're seeing it with all these everything's a crackdown. Everything is a violation of, with this language, with this environment, with this realm. What we're seeing is the more they have to crack down, the more they have to monitor, the more they have to create entire departments, demonstrates they don't have control of it. And in large ways, it's not designed to have control over. The context with which I want to keep this balanced is the fundamental purpose. And I'm gonna shave this way down, Alex. Forgive me, I'm not trying to get off task, but I do think that we need to shave this down to the instrumental core value, and that is this: what we're talking about are not government produced or provided freedoms. They are inalienable and inherent rights. It is the government's responsibility to preserve and protect those, not to provide. And by provide, I mean that they come from a higher source. And I think the foundational difference that we're really starting to see in a lot of ways is the context by which we recognize where these rights come from. And when you believe the government is the one providing them, it's easy to see why people would believe it's the government that should have the right to monitor them and manage them. And that's where I think there's a breakdown for a lot of people out there. They don't see it that way. They don't see government as the instrument to monitor what they feel are their God-given rights. And I think that when we look around the world, the picture is pretty bleak. And I'm going to say, from a historical perspective, I want someone to fact check me on that. I want you to tell me that you've got Uyghur Muslims in China that have more rights, or that are in a position that are truly facing absolute brutality. I want someone to tell me that you can have the access to media, the freedom of your voice in a place like North Korea. Please tell me that Yemen is your beacon of light when it comes to women's rights. I think when we consider what we have and who provides them, even if you don't have that belief, we have a country that says you have a right to have those beliefs based off of the amendments to our Constitution. And those are the things that I think we need to focus on. I think right now there's just this snapback in the last 24 hours, because there's so much loose language out there. There's so much that they're trying to fix. Again, I believe the Biden administration looks at itself. I won't speak on behalf of the American public, but I think that the Biden administration in many ways looks upon itself as this unifying, healing, welcomed reason. And the language they use is amazing. For friends of mine that work in public affairs, it is amazing for me to watch an environment where press secretaries legitimately answer questions with, I'll get back to you. Now, that's fine. If you want to get back to me and look into it, that's fully professionally acceptable. I would hope that you'd be a little more prepared actually on the front end and could at least address things. But between your press secretary kind of blowing off questions or flat out not answering them, or saying, this new military branch, this is today's new plane. I get it. Is it kind of a smug off the cuff comment? Yeah. But when you're the voice of the administration, come on. When the president of the United States puts out things, and now you're seeing everybody walk them back. Everybody uses I love this, walk it back. I misspoke. I love these things. The concern that I'm getting at, tied into what you were speaking of with regard to this kind of ministry of truth, is who are the ministers? Does it just change with an executive that we put in? I mean, is that all that it is?
Oh, certainly this ministry will be of better men.
So again, my point comes down to this. I don't believe when I see a lot of the stories that come out. It's not that I don't believe them because they're fake news and all this. No, I just mean I don't think that the mainstream media possesses the tools, or even more detrimentally, I don't think they possess the capacity, the capability, or the desire to truly capture the actual heartbeat of this country. First off, there are 330 million people. That'd be a tough task to do. And we've seen what polling means. I mean, look at previous races time and time and time again. I mean, what I'm getting at is that when you see things that have these massive big terms out there, sure, that's the case if the lens you're using is the mainstream media. And I just don't think a lot of people are using that anymore.
Well,
as many as were. But the mainstream media does have the biggest microphone, so it can get the message out.
Well, so there's sort of two points to that. First of all, I agree. Being able to say, look, let me get back with you on something, I think is legitimate. My problem is, as we've learned, she was given, or they're asking the questions in advance. They know what they're going to get. How in the world do you not have an answer if you know the question's coming? Secondly, you're right, but I think it needs more nuance when you say that people are no longer turning to the mainstream media. The problem is that I agree, no one's sitting down at 6:00 every day to watch Diane Sawyer, right?
Great reference.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I always like Diane Sawyer. Now she's doing commercials for retirement homes for people. But it's like no one's sitting down. No, is it Jane Pollock? Never. It's irrelevant. Point is, you're right. People aren't doing that anymore. But you know what they are doing? They're getting their news from the headlines of Yahoo, from Twitter, from things shared on Facebook. And that is still mainstream media. It's when things get fact checked. They're fact checked by the mainstream media, which has no interest in being journalists. The quote unquote journalists in mainstream media aren't. This is what we call the mainstream media. And let's be honest, if we're looking at people actually watching things, it is YouTube. It is these other new, what we've traditionally called new media. We just kind of need to accept this is media now. Like this, that's what this is. There's no mainstream or not. There's just media. The problem is that leftist media is still, by and large, the dominant voice, one way or the other. And it may not be that people are watching them at 6:00, right? They may not be tuning into Nightline, but they are still getting the mainstream media's perspective when they go to Yahoo, when they go to YouTube, and when they go to Facebook and Twitter and all these other things. And most people, by the way, just don't care. They aren't actually paying attention. And this is the thing that bothers me the most. They aren't paying attention. They're simply getting their opinions from thought leaders that they like. That's it. They're not even paying attention. They go vote. They feel how the way they feel because some thought leader told them to. So why? So let me push this one more step. Why are we surprised that a ministry of truth is being very publicly discussed when our entire society has basically in one voice screamed with the passion of a billion burning suns, we don't care, we don't want to think for ourselves, please just tell us what to think?
Well, so I want to dive into that. I do. I want to jump out real quickly to some of our fans writing in tonight. We want to say hi to them. So to Susan Robertson, good evening. We're glad you're here. To Abe Brunson, always good to see you. We have someone here, Mr. Michael Stroud. I hope I'm saying that correctly. He brings a good point. And then, of course, the greatest name in the history of the YouTubes, Cheese Freak Ginger Snap. That is quite possibly the greatest. I mean, that there should be an award for best name ever. But for Mr. Stroud's point, and I like what he said here, going back to what we were saying before, how are you not prepared for this? Number one, I mean, he provides a very thought out solution. Hey, just send me the questions ahead of time and we can address them. They can be clear. I mean, first off, you're going to get so many questions in an office like that. There's no way you're going to address 700 questions. You're not, but you can pick through some of them and say, hey guys, look, we've got 20 minutes today. I'm going to give you a briefing. Overwhelmingly, these are the big topics. Now, one thing we talk about, and I've talked about it on the show, is the concept of agenda setting and framing theory, which basically says, look, the news can't tell you what to think, but it can certainly frame what to think about. You'll pick 5-6 stories and that's about it. Again, we all know those stories and where they are and what they're coming from. The point that I would make is this. I think both sides have it wrong. And maybe not wrong. Let me say it like this. When you'll say things like, well, why won't she be prepared? Why not get the answers ahead of time? Because I'll tell you why, in my opinion. I think it's like this. I think the Republicans looked at it as though they were on defense because there was a posture that Trump viewed the media as the enemy, which I don't think is necessarily accurate per se. I think that relationship developed. I don't think that they were conducting themselves with the manner of high professionalism. But to say the enemy, this isn't, the rags of the Russian Revolution that you're pushing propaganda. What I would say is also this. Well, how come Jen Psaki's not prepared in doing these things? Because I think she looks at it like they work for her. I think
she does. Yes, absolutely.
This White House sees the media as an arm of one of its tools to use. So why? Who's going to hold her accountable? If you've listened to some of the things that Jen Psaki said back in the Obama administration, and then what she says now, it's unbelievable. I mean, if Haley McEnany were to say any of those things, she was crucified anyway, but she would be. This is not me lambasting the American public. Again, I don't think the American public is represented between the press conference room of the White House and the White House press secretary. I don't think that that's the dialogue going on between Americans. I just don't. First off, I think the American citizen is much more independent than the government, I think, many ways may acknowledge. I think they're also in many ways much more intelligent and informed. However, that's becoming more challenging because there's so much of a generation of news. There's just a ubiquitous presence. It's everywhere all the time. It's like clocks. They're on your computers, your cars, your watch, your cell phone, in your house, at work, in elevators, on the TV, everywhere you go. So you can't escape it. It's constantly, you're just inundated with it. And so I want to come back to the point to say, I don't think that it's how they look at the media as a tool. And it's a shame. It's a shame that that's what it is, because the only thing lower that I've seen in approving standards, the American press was at what, 18% last time we had the show?
Yeah.
And the Congress was at 6%.
Well, and what's worse is,
again, however much you take a poll by,
but exactly.
But again, it's amazing how many people. Do you remember a few years ago, 5-10 years ago, and people would be like, "Oh, he's got a website. Get out of here." A website? That must make it real,
right?
When you had people that were renaming schools in San Francisco, and one of the sources they used was Wikipedia. That's like That's like the comedian Eddie Izzard making a joke about how he's like, well, there's differences between like the Church of England and the Catholic Church. What would be a good example? Well, the Church of England, sometimes you wouldn't be surprised to see one of the pastors get up and say, good morning, everybody. This morning we're going to be drawing from this Red Book magazine that I took from my office. Colors are going to be in the chartreuse range this fall. And now that's no dig on the Church of England. I'm simply saying, when you've got this perspective that, what are you using as sources? What are you using as reference points? So the danger that I see with this is that now you're going to make it that when the government supposedly endorses something, people are going to be skeptical of it naturally. I don't see this as anything moving a step forward. I think this is all reaction to what we've seen with Trump's administration. I think it's an attempt to control. It's an attempt to assert power. It's an attempt to create an environment. When you use words like deprogram and re-educate, I mean, these are literally Maoist language.
Of course.
So that's why the American people informing themselves, and if this show's try to present a question or a challenge or a task to our listeners, it's what can you do? What channels can you create? What avenues can you pursue to get factual, accurate information?
And I really hope someone's got an answer, because I'm over here thinking about playing solitaire because I'm out. Like I said, we have the Ministry of Truth coming. I mean, certainly we don't have to think for ourselves anymore. Let me say one thing. My wife, lovely and beautiful, and is always right. She is my own Ministry of Truth. However, she has.
Sorry, that was good. I just caught that.
Thank you.
That's a wise man, Alex. This
is the reason I don't.
I would like to say for our fans listening, I know your wife, and she is a wonderful and brilliant woman. And you would be all the wiser to conference with her as your advisor at all times. Yeah, absolutely amazing.
Oh yeah,
absolutely amazing lady. Way out of your league, my friend. Way out of your league.
I freely admit that. But so one of the things that she kept saying is, I'm over here trying to say, this was months ago. I'm like, I don't understand how people can say this. And she keeps saying it's because they're getting the new, it's what they hear. People are just hearing the mainstream media all the time, right? They literally don't know. And I think I agree with her, which is why we said the conversation we just had like 30 seconds ago. My question is, how do we get people to actually red pill themselves? How do we get them to question and look at everything that's happening and say, hold up, well, if this is wrong, then what else is going on? Like, to actually start asking these questions. How do we get them to do that? The only thing I have at this point is I think we have to realize being nice is no longer the answer. I don't mean we need to be boorish or obtuse, but what we do need to be is far more direct. We have to be able to say, no, that's a lie, or you are incorrect, or I know where you heard that from, and that is wrong. Or you made that statement without facts. We have to be willing to do this, because this is what they've been doing the entire time. And when we kind of have to start when people, we can no longer say, I don't think we no longer have luxury to say, look, I don't want to talk about politics, or I don't want to talk about this. I don't want to cause, or I'm trying to avoid conflict. No, it needs to be, we need to stand up and actually have the conversation in a manner where it's like, no, I'm not going to bow or walk on eggshells before you. I'm going to tell you the truth. You want to prove me wrong? Go prove me wrong, but you don't get to just make these statements.
So I'm going to jump in here, and I am actually going to push back. And it's not necessarily against you, Alex, but it is kind of against the language and stuff. So let me say this. For our fans and listeners out there, I accept full responsibility for this comment, but I'm going to make it. I'm sorry. I have been an inner 86-year-old since I was about 11. anybody who knows me knows that I am simultaneously a 9-year-old and an 87-year-old at the same time.
This is true.
I probably eat more cereal now and know more about Power Pole to skateboards at this age than I ever did as a kid. And at the same time, I'm very much have been someone that have felt born out of the wrong era my whole life. I legitimately, I have. And again, I think people who know me would say that. Many of them, call me their 1950s buddy. I bring this up to say, I'm sorry, the language that we use now is cartoonish. And I mean everything from even the concepts of like red pilled, AOC, WTF. We've got something 2.0. All the language that we use, it's so childish for someone who loves words and loves reading or writing or engaging in stuff to present that. I really struggle with these things. And I struggle with them because I feel like if we don't take the means to communicate with each other seriously, that everything else after that kind of, you know what I mean? Could you imagine the Constitution? Yeah. It would I would love to see the Constitution when it would say something like, the right to own and bear arms shall not be infringed. And then at the bottom, it just said hashtag Patrick Henry, the concepts of the manner with which we communicate. I get it. Language is fluid. It's changing. I understand that. And I take full ownership as a citizen in this country, in this world, that language is dynamic. I get it. It doesn't mean I still don't think it's kind of dumb. And I don't take it that seriously because it's so silly. Now, I use that because when you use the phrase red pilling themselves, I don't even think that it should be looked at as the context of red pilling, blue pilling, whatever. You know what I mean? Again, hashtag the Matrix. I'm saying,
don't diss the Matrix.
You should argue in the marketplace of ideas. But what's happening is that when your idea is not the better idea, you have to change the rules. You have to change the dynamics to do it. And I think that's something remarkable. I think it's remarkable to watch. So you said before, how is it that we get there? Well, I don't think that we have to go about fighting us versus them, red versus blue, up versus down. The better idea is what should trump at all times. But what's been interesting is to see that now it's almost like the more slick and better produced idea is kind of what's there. I'll give you 2 examples and we can ping pong on this. And I'd like to kick this out to our boards that are lighting up. And I want to thank you guys so much. Yes, I mean I want to come back to a lot of stuff that we're seeing there with regard to how do you engage people. Mr. Stroud here says, as a psychiatric nurse, it's difficult to talk about truth respective to the individual person, i.e. rose-colored glasses. So I'm gonna give a perspective here, and I want us to kind of consider what this is. When we look at something that's these heavy-hitting topics that we're seeing right now, there's one in particular that I want to address. This is going to be a very hot-button subject, but I want to make sure that we address it and go to it. And that is this. The concept of having transgender students participating in athletics based off of their declared gender and not their biologically birth assigned sex.
Well, it's not their birth assigned sex; it's the sex they actually are genetically, biologically.
That's what upon their birth, what their body represents on a biological genetic level. That's what I mean. That's we got the same. We're in the same lane here. What I'm saying is, I'm finding the language coming about very, very interesting. I watched a part of the confirmation hearings with who will potentially be the new education secretary, and without directly answering it, but answering it in a very, very politically correct and public relationsly polished manner, what they basically said under questioning from Senator Rand Paul was, yes, they believe that students who are males should be freely allowed to compete with students that are females. Now, the counterpoint to that was, well, this is costing a lot of females opportunities, and that in the end of this, as much as we want to embrace all people for who they are, when you create a similar standard and then introduce two differently equipped components to compete under that standard, by definition, it's unfair. If you create a race and pull two cars up to the line and you say, these two cars are going to race, one of them is a 1973 Datsun and the other is a 2021 Ferrari, there's a good indication as to which car is going to win. By no means am I associating a woman with being any less competitive or less, or by no means at all. But when you make one of those, let's say better yet, when one of those is an airplane and the other one is a speedboat, they're both highly competitive. They're both impressive. They're both going after their objectives, but there are differences. I don't think that it's irrational. I don't think that it's a cause for concern. I certainly don't think that it's homophobic or any other words you want to input, transphobic, anything else, xenophobe, whatever. To worry about the welfare of each person competing. But when you change the definitions and you change the capability, but still hold to the same standard of how it's measured, you enter that very dangerous realm of the difference between equality and equity. And we'll call it fairness. And when I saw coming about today it was more present because it's not just an executive order anymore. It's now the director or who will be the Secretary of Education saying that they believe that this is something that is manageable and will be infused where capable. And so my question is, how is that point? How does that happen? As the very proud uncle of a highly competitive athlete who's a male, and I mean my nephew is brilliantly talented. And I'm talking about international level, and I'm going to just kind of leave things where they are because I'm sure my sister doesn't want me putting stuff out. But the point that I'm getting at is when I'm watching a potential Secretary of Education say that these things, and he's speaking to not only a senator, but a doctor in Rand Paul, to say this is okay. What happens when all of these school records and scholarship just start being impacted? How does that happen? And is it control what you said before? Is it because those in the Ministry of Truth are in control of the switches to control that narrative?
Well, according to the ministry, men and women is a sociological construct. It has nothing to do with biology. This is settled truth, sir. And how dare you oppose the ministry's statement on truth?
Well, I understood the difference people made when they used to say it's not religion, it's science. I mean, I disagree with that from my own faith-based perspective, where I think that faith and science actually intertwine in a very beautiful and harmonious way. However, complementary way. However, I will say the language that I'm seeing, and I'm truly asking this. I'm not here to pose some question like, man, people are stupid. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not
Although
here
they
to
are.
I'm not here to bash the country. That's not my intention for being part of this show. It's legitimately to have the conversations, for this show to become a platform. So I pose it again. How does that happen? For our if you are parents out there, if you have children, what is this perspective? How does this get to be told? Because the way that I say, I'm not a parent, and as I said, as a very, very proud uncle, but to a young man, so I have a different perspective, to be completely honest. My godchildren are both boys as well, and so to be honest, I don't want to pretend to know something I don't know. But I legitimately don't understand this. Alex, you're the father to multiple children, both boys and girls. How did we get, not just how did we get here, but how does something like this work? How do you make this? What does flicking the on switch to this do?
Let me answer that first question. We got here because we became afraid to speak truth. We were told that being nice was more important than being true, than being good. We got here because we didn't take people seriously when they said crazy things like, you know what? I think that my 3-year-old should get to determine if they're male or female, and I will cut off their genitalia and chemically modify their body at 3 or 4 years of age because they've decided that they're not what sex they were, what sex they are biologically, not assigned at birth. That's the corruption of the language. What sex they are biologically. I'm sorry. I have 3 kids, 2 boys, 1 girl. I can assure you at 3, 4, 5, they don't know anything. They were.
As someone who was your college roommate, we were all still figuring things out until about Thursday.
Oh, exactly. No, literally this last Thursday. No, but it's like, I'm sorry. One day they think it's like, you're telling me this kid thinks this boy thinks he's a girl. Guess what? Next week he's going to think he's a truck. Don't give me this idea that they can do this. But the point is, we didn't look at people and say, well, here's what we did. We laughed at them. We didn't take them seriously when they said this craziness. We laughed at them. We didn't take them seriously. We said, we pointed, we laughed at this insanity, and we let it go on. We didn't have the hard conversation of saying, you're insane. This ideology is insane. Let me show you how. And here is the problem that it leads to. We didn't have that conversation up front, and now we're coming from behind. So let me now come back to your second question. What does flipping the switch do? It destroys everything. And that's what it's designed to do. The reason this is all happening, I'm certain that there are people that genuinely believe this. I absolutely think that is the vast majority of people are, for whatever reason, believe this, but that's not why it exists. The reason for all of this is to undo the Western culture and to install something new. It is to install something, and not even new. Let me rephrase that. It's to install something very, very old. It's totalitarian reign. It is to make chattel property of the vast majority of Americans, of those in the West, and to give the elite power to control all things. That's what this does. The reason that people are willing to do this insanity, this is insane on its face, is because of the chaos it will create. Now, again, I believe there are people who genuinely believe this, and we need to have conversations with them. That's what I'm saying. We no longer have the luxury to be nice. We have to be firm. Again, doesn't mean we have to be ugly. By no means. Be polite, be courteous, but you can't just say, "Look, I don't want whatever," and we'll just let this go. No. You have to stand and fight for this. I'm not saying do it on the internet because I don't think necessarily Facebook, the Twitter is going to be the place for this fight to happen. People are having them. Great. It's in your life. It's your friend, your neighbor, your sister, your brother, your niece, your own children. We have to have these conversations one-on-one. We have to do the best job we can of making the arguments. And if you don't think that you can make the best argument, go find something on YouTube or whatever and say, here, watch this, and then let's talk about it. Watch it with them. Have them turn to our show. At some point, we'll start. We can start maybe doing things. But the point is, we no longer have the luxury to not fight. We have to fight, and we don't do it through violence. We do it through advocacy and reasonable conversations.
So there's two things I want to address here, and I'm interested in that. And the first one is I want to draw off something here that Michael Stroud said again, and it's an interesting point. He said, as a nurse scientist, it's interesting that one may reject natural biology at face value, but they will still be subject to biology, i.e., the trans female gets testicular cancer. What I'm going to find fascinating is how far is medicine willing to bend on this? Because
apparently all the way.
Well, what's going to start happening is, you're going to start seeing words, nomenclatures, whatever, changed in things like the DSM, right? The diagnostic manual. And you're going to start to see that happen. And so potentially, right? Because you have to reinforce it. You're seeing it in military recruiting, right? There's now the concept of letting the new incoming Secretary of Defense, Austin, has now said that he's going to, charge these committees with finding the channels for transgender personnel to join the military, where they can now come and have the procedures. And so now you're going to have to create a way that someone's going to say, well, wait a minute, you said you had eczema. That's a pre-existing condition. Well, this is a pre-existing. So do we reevaluate all of those standards as to what a pre-existing condition is? And that's for another conversation. But I want to bring this point. I do stand in a different posture than you do on this topic, slightly. Thematically, I think that science, biology, faith, intentionality, however you choose to look at it, we are born as men and women. That's what I believe. Males and females. That's my belief. Now, I will say this. This may be the only gray area that I think that I have in difference to you on this, Alex, but I think it's pretty predictable about what I'm going to say. And that is, I very firmly believe that there are people who do see themselves this way. I very firmly believe that there are people who have belief structures and interpret and visualize, and their senses tell them, their inner XYZ factor informs that identity to them, that they are something else. I believe that. I don't believe that changes their genetics. I don't believe that makes them a man or a woman. I don't believe that if you possess that mentality, that therefore you switch it because, well, that's just what you say you are. By saying, well, I'm a woman, that doesn't make you a woman. It means that your interpretation of yourself may think that you're a woman. And I think that is something that as a human being, we render respect, we render treatment, we render psychological support, we render love, we render patience and tolerance. But where this is starting to get so blurry in those lines is that this is not coming about anymore to be about acceptance, tolerance, love, support, relational development. It's getting into the realm of codifying law. And now what I'm starting to see, as someone, as I've said on the show many times, who has been very blessed to have very multiple strong women in my life, from my mother to my sister to my grandmother, my stepmother, people in my life that I've seen. What I will say is, I'm not trying to stir the pot here, but I'm going to share my concern, and that is the people that I see in an attempt to help, or what looks like help. Some people might be doing air quotes right now, to help transgender youth and transgender people. The concern that I have is that it seems like the people it's going to come down on are going to be women in terms of action, meaning some girls aren't going to feel comfortable in a bathroom, so they're going to go home to go to the bathroom, or they're not going to go to the bathroom, or they're going to find some way of trying to create an environment that they're overcoming these fears that they may potentially have. And for men, I think it's going to be the concerns with where you're going to get speech codes because things are going to fall into a language that they're not going to understand, not because men are stupid, but because the concept of, I don't know a lot of men, and I'll say this for myself, I would not feel uncomfortable if a woman came into the bathroom where I was. I'll be honest, I can't stand public bathrooms anyway. I think they're gross, and I avoid them like the plague. I think we should just have independent stalls where there's a commode and a sink and a mirror and one door, and it shuts and it locks, and you have privacy. That's my thought. And everyone says, oh, it's so expensive. Well, I think it's a lot cheaper than having massive overhauls at federal government levels. But what I'm getting at is, I would not necessarily be concerned about a woman coming into a bathroom. I'm 6'2", 200 pounds, whatever I am. I honestly don't know. But let's say that. I physically, I don't feel that threat. Does a 14-year-old girl who's 5'3" and weighs 95 pounds carry that same feeling? I don't know. But I want to create an environment, and I want to be supportive of an environment that allows for that 14-year-old to have the safest experience that they can in a vulnerable situation, like a group shower washroom for sports, athletics at the school. Again, things I hated. I hated washrooms. To this day, I can't stand public washrooms. I'm an extraordinarily modest person that way. I'll put that out there on the internet. But
Well, you're also a germaphobe. But so hold on. So hold on.
Absolutely.
So let me answer two questions real quick. First
Sure.
of all, we don't disagree. Uh, Body dysmorphia is a real thing, right? It's a psychological condition, and as you said, people who legitimately suffer from that dysfunction should be treated with kindness. They should be treated and supported psychologically, meaning they should receive proper psychological help. That is, we completely agree on that. And by the way, that is actually not what's happening anymore. That's the problem. Now, does the 95-pound 14-year-old girl, is she going to feel the same level of comfort if someone from the opposite sex comes into the bathroom? I assure you that is not the case. And here's the deal. You said who suffers. It is the female who's going to suffer, because she's going to realize, because here's the question. Does the guy who's in there, who has, since the rules on this aren't that you have to have transitioned, right? That's not the case. So guess what? Some guy, you don't know that the guy that claims to be a female and is showering in the women's bathroom or in the women's washroom is actually someone who suffers from body dysphoria or dysmorphia. That's the problem. It is creating victims out of women. And I go back to, why would someone advocate for something that is so obviously factually expected? It's because they have the intention. Actually, let me state this. I originally was thinking about calling this episode the fig leaf, because everything that's happening, that we're seeing right now, is literally hiding behind what are clearly fig leaves. For those who don't know, a fig leaf coming from the story of Adam and Eve, when they hid themselves once they realized they were naked by making clothes out of fig leaves. But it's an homage to that. But in an argument, a fig leaf is something that is designed to hide the truth, right? I say I'm coming to you, Nick, and I need to borrow, or rather, I say, Nick, I need you to sell your car that you currently have right now because I think it's unsafe for you. But the truth of the matter is, your car is far too cool, and I'm losing the ability to hit on chicks because you drive that car. Now, that's clearly untrue.
My friend, flattery will get you everywhere.
It is. Well, that's exactly. But my point is, the fig leaf it's unsafe. Well, I mean, yeah, it's a cool car, so it's not as safe as, say, a larger SUV. So there is a reality there, but it's not why that's actually happening. The fig leaf for the whole transgender thing is, well, we want to respect people's internal truths. The fig leaf behind the ministry of truth is, we don't want lies to be spread. They're fig leaves to hide the actual truth, which is they're trying to destroy Western society. They want to make certain they get rid of all the quote unquote lies in order to control what the truth that you perceive is, because then they can literally control what you think. They want to do this they're willing to victimize women in order to achieve the chaos, because what this is really about is destroying the family. It's about destroying the nuclear family unit. That is what this is about. That's not even a question. That is what this is about. It's just that the argument that's given is a fig leaf. So this comes down to what we have, and this is why I'm saying, addressing things the way I have, about how we no longer have the ability to not argue against this. But what we have to do is we have to remove the fig leaves in our arguments, because the simple fact of the matter is, if you argue the fig leaf, you're going to lose every time. You have to remove the fig leaf and expose the fig leaf for what it is, so that people can actually see what it is that's being argued for.
Well, and I think Michael's point earlier that he's making here is where he says, when we discussed some of this, it was basically, seeing this potential impact to females at a disproportionate level than it will be to males. And his point is, so what does this do for the party for feminism? And I guess my point is, Is it fear of language that people are afraid to come out and say what they think for fear of being doxxed and branded and petitioned and canceled to say? And the reason I bring this up is because I actually have an anecdote for this, and that is, if you remember Martina Navratilova, the 9-time Wimbledon champion and a decades, multiple decades long advocate for LGBTQ rights and women's rights, was removed from a committee that she was on because they disapproved of her perspective on transgender competition, because she said having a man play alongside of a woman is not competition.
Yeah.
Not to undermine the woman, but I'm saying if you take the number 1 ranked male in the world and put him against the number 1 ranked female in the world, it's in tennis at least, it's a disproportionate representation. And that's not me trying to put women in any position whatsoever. It's simply trying to state statistics and numbers. And I guess that the point that I'm making is, without calling out my ladies out, the women and the leaders of the community that are out there, our teammates, our allies, friends, family, whomever, sisters, aunts, moms, I don't hear a voice coming. I really can't. I don't hear a very present voice coming from the female friends that I have, and I'm trying to make it as personal as possible without overgeneralizing, because there could be organizations out there doing it, but I'm not aware of it. And I certainly
there are, but there are. But the problem is, as to your point, and this goes back to the original point here, in many ways, you don't hear them because the mainstream media doesn't want them to be heard. But yeah, no, so it goes back to so this is why this fight is going to have to be on the ground. It's going to have to be hand to hand, sort of person to person, sort of advocacy, until at such time that there's enough of us to really make real noise. The bigger problem with the election isn't, let's stipulate that there was, let's even work from the idea that there was enough irregularity to switch the election. Great. It wasn't 70 million votes worth. It was at best within thousands or less, or hundreds of thousands per state. If the irregularities were enough to switch, it was minor. It was small switches here and there. It wasn't 60 or 70 million fake votes. There is a sufficient number of people who genuinely believe this stuff. We have to have the conversation one-on-one. The reason the news media can get away with this is because there's enough people supporting them to get away with it. This is going to be a change that's going to have to happen on the ground level. And we're going to have to mention, we're going to have to point out that this transgender agenda victimizes women. We're going to have to point all of this stuff out. We're going to have to point out that the truth is something that we are fighting for, because what happens when you reject reality? When you reject truth, you have rejected God in his entirety. And that's what this is about. This is about rejecting truth. This is about manipulating truth by the elite to control all of us. We have to fight this by talking to one another, to people who disagree with us, respectfully but forcefully. We cannot simply allow this to go on thinking someone else is going to save us. We have to switch those 60 million to our side, or this is over.
Well, if there's a concern that I have, it's one that I hold. It seems to be a willful ignorance to no longer pursue the truth with veracity, but rather to more easily digest what's provided because it's done with some type of high-level production value. And the concern that I have is that the other reason is that people may be fearful of revealing their actual true feelings and thoughts on these things because of this vindictive digital massacre that can take place now so easily with doxing and all that. I think that the real victim here is, you mentioned the election, and I'll just leave it at this. Regardless of which direction you view it from, the damage that was done was that the faith in the integrity of our elections was severely impacted. Furthermore, we've come to a point where it seems like we don't want to believe in the concept of objective truth. And that seems like a dangerous thing.
But we rejected that a long time ago, though. That's the problem. As a culture, we rejected that a long, long time ago, and this is the end result. This is the final. This is the final domino. This is where This is where it led to. Again, when we started saying, "I respect your truth," the fight was over. Then that's why they believe they can get away with this, is because they're going to, now that they've destroyed the concept of the truth, now they're going to build it back up in their own image.
I have to hold on to the belief that in the marketplace of ideas, the better idea is the one that, for the survival of the organization, the group, the person, the species, whatever you want, has to be what perseveres. It has to be.
Okay, so let me say this, and this is remarkably cynical, but it's also remarkably true.
Okay.
But then I'll come back to give you the light at the silver lining here.
The business.
Right. In the marketplace of ideas, the truth does not have to win. There's nothing saying that the truth has to win. What wins is what people ultimately decide to choose to accept or to believe. Truth wins when the people choose to believe the truth, when they choose to pursue truth. So is it possible that this is all lost because our entire society has rejected truth? It's entirely possible. I'm not going to say it's not. What I will say, though, is even if it's lost for now, we can change people's minds. Seeing how bad things can get can change people's minds. People are not static things that do not alter. They change, they grow. We can convince people to pursue truth. And once enough people choose to pursue truth, at some point, the marketplace will change. And then good ideas will win.
We just got to keep the faith, brother.
And we got to keep fighting. That's the thing. We have to fight. This is not something we can simply abdicate to other people. It's every single one of us, every single day.
You're here.
And on that note, to Cheese Freak Ginger Snap, A. Brunson, Michael Stroud, Susan Robertson, and everyone else, we bid you adieu. We look forward to being here next week. We know that y'all are out there. We are encouraged that y'all are out there. Y'all are part of this. This is a revolution of truth, and it takes every hand on deck. This is not something that some person on the internet is going to make happen. You have to do it, and we believe in your strength and ability to make this country as great as it can be. For Nick and everyone back here over here at Not Playing Politics, we say good night, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Guys, thanks so much.
Next episode, rather. Sorry, I mean, not tomorrow, meaning metaphorically next week. 7 o'clock Central Standard Time, Wednesday.
I appreciate that setup. Yeah, teeing that up. Yeah, quick shout out to Brian Chalez out there. Appreciate you tuning in. Want to say thanks to all who have contributed tonight, and to keep the faith. Remember, victory goes to those who believe in it the most and believe in it the longest. So you guys be safe, stay positive, and love yourself and someone else. Take care.